Officer, can I help you? Step away from the counter, now. What? Why? Hands where I can see them. Over, now. Sir, I need a court order. Please calm down.
Don't tell me to calm down. Show me your papers. This is harassment.
That word, harassment, it would become the foundation of a $7 million federal judgment just 15 months later. Every second of the encounter captured on high-definition cameras, every constitutional violation documented in crystal clarity. Officer George Wilson thought he was following protocol. Anonymous tip. Suspicious person at a family pharmacy. Possible immigration violation. In his mind, demanding papers was standard procedure and compliance was mandatory. But when he walked into Grayson Family Pharmacy that Wednesday afternoon and demanded citizenship papers from the man in the white coat, he made a choice that would destroy his career and cost his city $7 million. Dr. Marley Grayson knew exactly what was happening, and when he refused that unlawful demand, Wilson made a series of decisions that 5 different camera angles would capture in excruciating detail. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this, stories about ordinary Americans defending their constitutional rights, need to be told. Dr. Marley Grayson, 28 years old, doctor of pharmacy from the University of Houston, first-generation American, son of Jamaican immigrants who'd built Grayson Family Pharmacy from nothing 23 years earlier. Marley had taken over daily operations 2 years ago, and under his leadership, the pharmacy had become a cornerstone of the neighborhood, providing medication therapy management, free health screenings, and prescription delivery to homebound seniors every week. That Wednesday afternoon, he was doing what he'd done hundreds of times before, counseling Mrs. Eleanor Martinez, a 72-year-old diabetic, about her insulin regimen. His Doctor of Pharmacy degree and DEA registration certificate hung clearly visible on the wall behind the prescription counter. Everything was professional, routine, completely ordinary. Officer George Wilson had been with the department for 11 months. A rookie. No prior complaints in his file because he was too new to have accumulated any. At 2:33 p.m., dispatch forwarded him a call. Anonymous complaint about Grayson Family Pharmacy. Suspicious person behind the counter, possibly undocumented. No name, no specifics, no corroborating evidence, just vague accusations from an unknown caller. Wilson didn't verify the tip, didn't call the pharmacy to confirm ownership, didn't check business licensing records, didn't consult with his supervising sergeant. He grabbed his training officer, Officer Dale Miller, and drove straight to the location. Both officers activated their body cameras as they stepped out of the patrol car at 2:51 p.m. Inside the pharmacy, 3 ceiling-mounted CCTV cameras were already recording. One camera covered the entrance, one focused on the prescription counter, one monitored the restricted pharmacy area behind the security gate. The store's audio system, designed to capture potential robbery attempts, was recording every word. Should police be required to verify anonymous tips before demanding identification? Comment yes or no. Wilson's eyes swept past the framed credentials on the wall behind Marley, the Doctor of Pharmacy degree from the University of Houston, the DEA registration certificate with Marley's name printed in bold federal lettering, the Texas State Board of Pharmacy license. His gaze didn't linger on any of them. Instead, he planted his feet wider, his hand resting on his duty belt in what Marley recognized as a dominance posture. "I need to see identification and proof of citizenship," Wilson repeated, his voice carrying across the small pharmacy. Mrs. Martinez, still holding her insulin prescription, took an instinctive step backward. Marley kept his hands visible on the counter, a deliberate choice. "Officer, under the 4th Amendment of the United States Constitution, I have the right to be secure in my person against unreasonable searches and seizures. An anonymous tip, without corroborating evidence of criminal activity, does not establish reasonable suspicion. You have no legal authority to demand my identification." The words came out calm, measured, professorial. Marley had studied constitutional law as part of his pharmacy jurisprudence course. Understanding patient rights and privacy laws required understanding the broader constitutional framework. He'd never imagined he'd need to cite the Fourth Amendment in his own pharmacy. Wilson's jaw tightened. I'm conducting an investigation into a suspicious person report. You're obstructing that investigation. An investigation requires articulable facts suggesting criminal activity, Marley continued, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. Supreme Court precedent from Terry v. Ohio established that reasonable suspicion must be based on specific and articulable facts, not on inchoate and unparticularized suspicion or hunch. What specific facts do you have that suggest I've committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime? Officer Miller shifted his weight behind Wilson, his expression unreadable. Marley caught the micro-movement, a flicker of recognition, perhaps discomfort. Miller was the training officer, the veteran who should have been the voice of experience and restraint. But he said nothing. Wilson took a step closer to the prescription counter. I'm going to ask you one more time. Show me your papers, your citizenship papers. The word landed like a slap. Papers, not identification, not ID. Papers. Marley felt the historical weight of that word settle over the interaction. Papers, he said quietly, his eyes meeting Wilson's. You're asking me for papers. That's interesting word choice, officer. Historically, in this country, demanding papers from black citizens has a very specific connotation. It harkens back to an era when people who looked like me had to carry documentation proving we weren't someone's property. The Fourth Amendment was designed, in part, to prevent exactly this kind of arbitrary demand for documentation. 2 more customers had entered during the exchange. An elderly man with a prescription bag froze near the vitamin aisle. A young mother with a toddler stopped mid-stride, her eyes widening as she processed the scene. A uniformed officer confronting the pharmacist everyone in the neighborhood knew and trusted. Wilson's face flushed. I don't need a history lesson. I need compliance. You need probable cause, Marley corrected, or at minimum, reasonable suspicion based on articulable facts. Compliance without legal justification is called a violation of civil rights. And those violations, officer, they tend to be very expensive for municipalities. Officer Miller finally spoke. George. His voice was low, cautious, just the one word. A warning that wasn't quite a warning. Wilson ignored him. You're doing this the hard way, then. Step out from behind that counter. Marley didn't move. I'm standing in my place of business, serving my patients. I've committed no crime. I've given you no reasonable suspicion. I've violated no law. Under Hebel v. 6th Judicial District Court, a state may require you to identify yourself only during a lawful stop based on reasonable suspicion. This is not a lawful stop. The pharmacy had gone completely silent. Mrs. Martinez clutched her prescription bottle. The elderly man near the vitamins had his phone out now, recording. The young mother had positioned herself protectively in front of her child, her expression a mixture of fear and disbelief. Wilson's hand moved to his handcuffs. Last chance. The easy way or the hard way. Officer Miller stood frozen, a statue in blue, his silence a form of complicity that would later be dissected in depositions and legal briefs. He knew what was happening. Marley could see it in the tightness around Miller's eyes, the way his hand twitched toward his partner but never completed the gesture. Miller understood the constitutional violation unfolding before him, and yet he said nothing. Did nothing. Marley glanced at the small dome camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, its red recording light a silent witness. Then he looked back at Wilson. I'm choosing to exercise my constitutional rights, officer. That's not the hard way. That's the American way. Wilson moved toward the waist-high security gate that separated the public area from the restricted pharmacy dispensing zone. His hand reached for the latch. Stop, Marley's voice cut through the tension. That area is restricted under federal and state pharmacy law. Only licensed pharmacists and authorized pharmacy personnel are permitted behind that counter. Under 21 CFR 1301.71, the Drug Enforcement Administration requires secured access to prescription drug storage areas. You cannot enter without a warrant or exigent circumstances. Wilson's fingers closed around the gate latch. I'm conducting an investigation. Then you need a warrant, Marley said, stepping toward the gate from his side. his body creating a physical barrier. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches. The Supreme Court established in Katz v. United States that warrantless searches are per se unreasonable unless they fall under specific exceptions. You have no warrant, there is no emergency, there is no consent, you have no legal authority to enter this secured pharmaceutical area. For a moment, they stood separated by nothing but a 3-foot gate and the entire weight of constitutional law. Mrs. Martinez had backed all the way to the front door. The man recording with his phone had moved closer, angling for a better view. The young mother had her hand on her child's shoulder, frozen in horrified fascination. Wilson yanked the gate open. The metal latch made a sharp click that seemed to echo through the pharmacy. "Officer, you are now committing criminal trespass in a DEA-secured area," Marley said, his voice rising slightly. "This is a federal violation of—" Wilson surged through the opening. His hands grabbed Marley's shoulders and spun him around with practiced force. Marley's chest hit the prescription counter, scattering prescription bottles. The sharp edge pressed into his ribs as Wilson yanked his right arm behind his back. "You're under arrest for obstruction," Wilson said, his breath hot against Marley's ear. The first handcuff closed around Marley's right wrist with a metallic snick, a sound Marley would hear in his dreams for months afterward. Cold steel, slightly too tight, the ratchet mechanism clicking 4 times. Wilson grabbed Marley's left arm, forcing it behind his back with enough pressure that Marley's shoulder socket screamed in protest. "I am not resisting," Marley said clearly, his voice projected toward the ceiling cameras. "I am complying with the physical arrest under duress. I have committed no crime. I have not obstructed any lawful investigation. This is an unlawful seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment. I am being arrested for exercising my constitutional rights." The second cuff closed. Snick, 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 snick. The metal bit into his left wrist. Wilson had cuffed him tight, tight enough that Marley could feel his pulse throbbing against the restraints, tight enough that his fingers began to tingle within seconds. Mrs. Martinez gasped audibly. Someone near the vitamins muttered, "Oh my God." "Search him," Wilson ordered Miller. Officer Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second, a pause so brief it might have been imperceptible to anyone not watching closely. Then he stepped forward and began patting down Marley's white pharmacist coat. His movements were mechanical, professional, deliberately gentle in contrast to Wilson's aggression. Miller's hand found Marley's wallet in his coat pocket. He pulled it out, flipped it open. Inside the clear plastic window was a U.S. passport card, the blue and gold design unmistakable. Miller pulled it out, examined it. Behind it, a Texas driver's license. "George," Miller's voice was tight, strained. He held up the passport card. "He's American, born in Miami, Florida, U.S. citizen." Wilson didn't even glance at the documents. "Doesn't matter. He obstructed my investigation. He refused a lawful order." "There was no lawful order," Marley said, his cheek still pressed against the counter. "Under Calendar v. Lawson, a demand for identification must be supported by reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. You had none. Under Garner v. San Antonio, retaliation for exercising First Amendment rights to challenge government authority is a constitutional violation. You are arresting me because I asserted my rights. That's not obstruction, that's retaliation, and it will cost you everything." Miller stared at the passport card in his hand. His thumb traced over the embossed seal. Marley could see the calculation happening behind the veteran officer's eyes, the recognition of catastrophic liability, the understanding that this arrest would never survive legal scrutiny, the awareness that he was witnessing his department's worst nightmare in real time. "He refused to comply," Wilson insisted, pulling Marley upright, the handcuffs cut deeper. "That's obstruction. Refusal to comply with an unlawful order is not a crime," Marley said, addressing the body cameras now, his voice steady despite the pain radiating from his wrists and shoulder. "It is a constitutional right. The First Amendment protects my right to challenge government overreach. The Fourth Amendment protects my right to refuse unreasonable searches and seizures. By arresting me for exercising these rights, you have violated 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, deprivation of rights under color of law." Wilson gripped Marley's upper arm and steered him toward the gate, away from the prescription counter, away from his pharmacy, away from his patients who stood watching in stunned silence. As they passed Mrs. Martinez, Marley saw tears streaming down her weathered face. The metallic jingle of the handcuffs accompanied each step. Wilson pushed Marley through the security gate, through the public area of the pharmacy, past the vitamins and the greeting cards and the blood pressure monitor, past the faces of his neighbors and customers, past the framed photo of his parents cutting the ribbon on opening day 23 years ago. As Wilson guided him toward the front door, Marley turned his head slightly toward the dome camera mounted above the register. "My name is Dr. Marley Grayson," he said clearly. "I am a United States citizen. I'm a licensed pharmacist. I have been unlawfully arrested for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights. The date is Wednesday, September 14th. The time is approximately 3:07 p.m. I am not resisting. I am documenting this violation for the record." Then Officer George Wilson walked him out into the bright afternoon sunlight, toward a patrol car and a booking process and a legal reckoning that would reshape both of their lives forever. The back of the patrol car was an oven. September in Texas meant heat that turned vinyl seats into griddles, and with his hands cuffed behind him, Marley couldn't adjust his position to avoid the surface that burned through his white coat. The partition between front and back was scratched plexiglass, smudged with handprints from 100 previous arrests. No handles on the inside doors. No way out except through someone else's decision. Wilson drove in silence. Miller sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead, his earlier hesitation calcified into stone-faced complicity. The radio crackled with routine traffic, a fender bender on Highway 59, a noise complaint in the 3rd Ward. Normal Wednesday afternoon business, while Marley's constitutional rights dissolved in real time. The handcuffs had cut off enough circulation that his fingers felt thick and clumsy. Each bump in the road sent jolts through his shoulders, the cuffs biting deeper. This was the punishment before any conviction, the process as penalty, the humiliation as deterrent. Every person who got arrested experienced this degradation, but Marley understood with sudden clarity that this machinery of humiliation was designed to make people submit, to make them confess, to make them plead guilty just to make it stop. The precinct booking area smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white glare. Sergeant Raymond Hayes stood behind the booking desk, a 23-year veteran whose expression shifted from bored routine to sharp attention the moment Wilson started explaining the arrest. "Obstruction of what investigation exactly?" Hayes asked, his pen hovering over the booking form. "Anonymous tip about suspicious person at the pharmacy," Wilson said. "Subject refused to provide identification and blocked access to the premises." Hayes looked up. "Blocked access to what premises?" "The pharmacy dispensing area." "His own pharmacy?" Hayes's pen stopped moving entirely. "You arrested a pharmacist for refusing to let you into his own secured prescription area?" "He was obstructing. What crime were you investigating?" Hayes interrupted. His voice had taken on an edge that made Miller shift his weight uncomfortably. Wilson hesitated. "Possible immigration violation." "Based on what probable cause?" "Anonymous tip." Hayes set down his pen with deliberate care. "Officer Wilson, an anonymous tip is not probable cause. It's barely reasonable suspicion, and only if it contains specific articulable facts suggesting criminal activity. What specific facts did this tip provide?" The silence stretched for 3 seconds. 5, 10. "Suspicious person at the pharmacy," Wilson finally said. Hayes looked at Marley, still handcuffed, still standing in his white pharmacist coat with his DEA registration number embroidered on the pocket. Then he looked back at Wilson. "You arrested a licensed professional in his own place of business for refusing an unlawful order based on an anonymous tip with no corroborating evidence." It wasn't a question. It was a diagnosis. "I need to make a phone call," Marley said quietly. "I'm invoking my Sixth Amendment right to counsel." Hayes nodded slowly. "Yeah, you're going to need a lawyer, and we're going to need our liability insurance." 3 hours later, Attorney James Chen stood in a conference room at the precinct reviewing video footage on 5 different screens. Chen specialized in civil rights litigation, 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 cases against law enforcement. He'd won a $4.2 million judgment the previous year against Houston PD for an unlawful arrest remarkably similar to Marley's. The footage was damning. Camera 1 showed Wilson and Miller approaching the pharmacy. Camera 2 captured the initial confrontation. Camera 3, the pharmacy's ceiling-mounted system, recorded the entire constitutional standoff in high definition. Camera 4 and 5 were the body cameras, providing dual perspectives of every moment, every word, every constitutional violation. But it was Camera 4, Wilson's body camera, that contained the smoking gun. Chen played it back 3 times to be certain. As Wilson and Miller walked from their patrol car toward the pharmacy entrance, before they'd even opened the door, Wilson's body camera microphone captured his voice in a low mutter to Miller. "Bet you $20 this guy's illegal. Look at him." The timestamp read, 2:51:17 p.m. Wilson had decided Marley was undocumented before ever speaking to him, before seeing any identification, before any investigation. The racial profiling wasn't a byproduct of the encounter, it was the entire basis for it. Chen made a note on his legal pad, pretext stop, racial animus, First and Fourth Amendment violations, qualified immunity unlikely to apply. Under federal law, qualified immunity protects officers from civil liability if their actions don't violate clearly established constitutional rights. But by 2023, the legal standard was crystal clear. You cannot arrest someone for refusing an unlawful order. You cannot demand identification without reasonable suspicion. You cannot enter a secured business area without a warrant or exigent circumstances. Wilson had violated all 3 principles, and he'd done so based on racial bias captured on his own body camera. The criminal charges against Marley were dropped within 48 hours. The assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Rodriguez, had taken one look at the video evidence and the arrest report and made a phone call to the police chief. "If we prosecute this," she'd told him, "we'll lose and then we'll get sued anyway. If we drop it now, we still get sued, but at least we look slightly less stupid." Chen filed the federal lawsuit exactly 14 days after Marley's arrest. The complaint ran 47 pages and cited 16 different cases establishing the constitutional violations. The prayer for relief asked for $7 million, $3 million in compensatory damages for the violation of Marley's civil rights, emotional distress, and damage to his professional reputation. $4 million in punitive damages designed to punish the willful and wanton disregard for constitutional protections. The complaint named Officer George Wilson individually, Officer Dale Miller for failure to intervene, and the City of Houston under Manel Ver's Department of Social Services for maintaining policies and customs that permitted constitutional violations. It detailed the papers demand, the unlawful entry into the secured pharmacy area, the retaliatory arrest, and the premeditated racial bias captured on audio. The day the lawsuit was filed, Chen held a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse. Behind him stood Marley, still wearing a white coat, flanked by community leaders and civil rights advocates. Doctors, Grayson's arrest represents everything wrong with policing that prioritizes compliance over constitutional rights, Chen told the assembled reporters. The evidence will show that Officer Wilson decided my client was a criminal based solely on the color of his skin, that he demanded papers using language designed to dehumanize, and that he arrested Dr. Grayson not for committing any crime, but for having the audacity to assert his Fourth Amendment rights. That is not law enforcement. That is tyranny. The cameras clicked and flashed. Marley stood silent, dignified, a living embodiment of constitutional principles under assault. Somewhere across town, in the office of the city attorney, lawyers were already calculating settlement ranges and updating their liability reserve fund. The bill for 15 minutes of constitutional violation was coming due. 15 months after that Wednesday afternoon, a federal courtroom in downtown Houston fell silent as the jury foreman rose to read the verdict. The wooden benches were packed with community members, civil rights advocates, and reporters. Marley sat at the plaintiff's table in a dark suit, his hands folded, his expression carefully neutral. Across the aisle, the city's legal team arranged their faces into professional masks while their internal calculations ran wild. The trial had lasted 8 days. The city had offered to settle twice, first for $1.2 million, then for $3.5 million. Chen had rejected both offers. "We're not negotiating," he'd told the city attorney. "We're establishing precedent." The jury had spent 4 hours watching the split-screen footage that Chen's technical team had assembled. 5 camera angles synchronized to the second, playing simultaneously. On the left screen, Wilson's body camera showed his perspective, Marley's professional credentials clearly visible on the wall, ignored. On the right, the pharmacy's ceiling camera captured the full scene, including the customer's shocked reactions. The audio played through courtroom speakers with crystal clarity. "Let me see your papers right now. I am an American citizen, born and raised in Miami, Florida. This is harassment." The jury had watched Wilson breach the secured pharmacy gate. They'd watched the handcuffs close. They'd watched Marley's calm documentation of his own arrest. And they'd heard, 3 times, because Chen played it 3 times, Wilson's voice from the parking lot. "Bet you $20 this guy's illegal. Look at him." But the evidence that seemed to affect the jury most profoundly wasn't the video. It was the testimony of Marley's patients. Mrs. Eleanor Martinez, 72, had taken the stand with trembling hands. "Dr. Grayson saved my life," she'd said, her accent thick with emotion. "He noticed my insulin dosage was wrong. The hospital made a mistake. He called my doctor, he fixed it. He checks on me every week, and I watched them put him in handcuffs like a criminal." For what? For being black in his own pharmacy? James Thompson, 68, a retired postal worker, had testified about Marley delivering medications to him during the pandemic when Thompson was immunocompromised. "That young man would come to my door, leave my prescriptions on the porch, call me to make sure I understood how to take everything, never charged me a delivery fee, never made me feel like I was a burden. And they arrested him for asserting his rights? For refusing an illegal order? That's not America. That shouldn't be America." The testimony had gone on for 2 days. A parade of elderly patients, young mothers, diabetics, heart patients, people managing chronic pain and mental health conditions. Every one of them told the same story. Marley Grayson was a pillar of his community, a healthcare professional who treated dignity as part of the prescription. In his closing argument, Chen had stood before the jury with his hands open, his voice steady but passionate. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Fourth Amendment exists for moments exactly like this. It exists to protect Dr. Grayson, and by extension to protect all of us, from government officials who believe compliance is more important than constitutional rights. Officer Wilson didn't just violate the law, he violated the very premise of American citizenship. He told an American-born pharmacist to produce papers as if we live in a police state. He arrested Dr. Grayson not for committing a crime, but for committing the offense of knowing his rights and having the courage to assert them." Chen had paused, letting the words settle. "The city wants you to believe this was a mistake, an error in judgment. But you've heard the audio, you've seen the video. Officer Wilson decided Dr. Grayson was a criminal before he ever spoke to him. That's not a mistake. That's prejudice. That's exactly what the Constitution was designed to prevent. Your verdict today sends a message about what we value as a society. It answers the question, what is the price of constitutional rights? What does it cost when a government official decides those rights don't apply to someone because of the color of their skin?" The jury had deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. Now the foreman held the verdict form with both hands. "In the matter of Grayson versus Wilson et al., we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Dr. Marley Grayson. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $3 million. We award punitive damages in the amount of $4 million. Total award, $7 million. The courtroom erupted. Someone in the back started clapping. The judge gavelled for order, but even she couldn't completely suppress the wave of vindication that swept through the room. The aftermath unfolded swiftly and severely. Officer George Wilson was terminated from the police department before the verdict was even formally entered. His law enforcement certification was revoked by the state, making him permanently unemployable as a police officer in Texas. Officer Dale Miller received a 30-day suspension without pay for failure to intervene and was assigned to mandatory remedial training on constitutional policing. The precinct was placed under a federal consent decree requiring comprehensive Fourth Amendment training for all officers. Every cop in the department had to pass a constitutional literacy exam covering reasonable suspicion, probable cause, and the limits of police authority. Anonymous tips were flagged in the system, requiring supervisory approval before any demand for identification could be made. The policy manual was rewritten, the training curriculum was overhauled, the city's $7 million check cleared 6 weeks after the verdict. Marley used $2 million to renovate Grayson Family Pharmacy, expanding the consultation area and adding a community health center offering free blood pressure screenings and medication therapy management. He established the Constitutional Rights in Healthcare Scholarship Fund with another $1 million, providing full-ride pharmacy school scholarships to minority students committed to serving underserved communities. The rest went to his parents, to his legal fees, and to his future. On the day the renovated pharmacy reopened, Marley stood behind the same prescription counter where he'd been arrested. The DEA registration certificate still hung on the wall, but next to it now hung a framed copy of the Fourth Amendment, printed in letters large enough to read from across the room. Mrs. Martinez was his first patient that day. She handed him her prescription and then, unexpectedly, hugged him across the counter. "You stood up," she whispered. "You didn't back down." Marley thought about that moment in the patrol car, hands cuffed behind his back, vinyl burning through his coat. He thought about the humiliation, the booking process, the fingerprinting, the mugshot. He thought about the 15 minutes that changed his life. "We the people," he said quietly. "Doesn't mean anything if we don't defend it when it's tested." The pharmacy's security cameras were still recording, just as they had that Wednesday afternoon 15 months earlier. Technology had borne witness to injustice and, ultimately, to accountability. 5 camera angles had captured the truth in a way that no biased police report could obscure. George Wilson had thought his badge gave him the authority to demand papers. He'd thought compliance was mandatory and constitutional rights were negotiable. He'd learned, at a cost of $7 million in his entire career, that in America, when the system works as designed, the Constitution wins. And Dr. Marley Grayson, first-generation American, son of Jamaican immigrants, doctor of pharmacy, went back to doing what he'd always done, serving his community, counseling his patients, and standing as living proof that sometimes knowing your rights and having the courage to defend them is the most patriotic act of all.